women that are in ownership is far less. And also the amount of women that work full-time in dentistry as active dentists is way less. And then also the amount of women that are specialists is profoundly less. And one of the reasons for that is women do crave balance. They can get easily exhausted by the pressures of not only working full-time as a dental owner or a full-time dentist, but also being the mom, also being the partner.
All right. I'm very, very excited for today's episode and for our guest. But before we jump into all the amazing content that Brandi is going to share with us, we are going to go to the Ask Ken question. And the one that came in from our listeners is about cash flow. And specifically, the question was, how do I make sure that my business is actually generating cash? And there are a couple of different ways to go about this. My preferred way is you go to the statement of cash flow and you merely look at, it's just a simple subtraction problem where you look at cash from operations, you subtract investments, which are in dentistry, it's primarily CapEx. And that number tells you if it's positive, that means you're generating cash in your business. If that number is negative, it means you're actually consuming cash in your business. We want cash generating businesses. We want cash machines as we build out our business models. And so that is the answer to the Ask Ken question. Now we got that out of the way now, Brandi. And I just want to warn you, this person is amazing. I've had a chance to interact with her many times. She is passionate about what she's doing and how she's trying to uplift the dental industry. And Brandi, I think I'll just give you maybe a minute here to introduce yourself, and then feel free to tell us what is the truth that you want exposed, and what are you thinking about, and what are you doing about it?
Yeah, well, Brandi Marzolino, and I'm a leadership coach and the founder of the Empowered Leadership Experience for Women in Dental, and also Courage and Joy at Work. And I work with leaders and founders on developing themselves personally so that they can not only lead in their businesses, but also lead in their lives. And I'm insanely passionate about it, like you shared. And as far as the truth that I want revealed, I guess is speaking to that. I mean, obviously the idea about leading your own life. I think there's a lot of leaders out there that are putting on the highlight reel and putting on the show in the industry that they have the key to the kingdom and they have it figured out. And meanwhile, their personal lives are in disarray. And I really believe that you can't lead in business if you can't lead your life. And it starts internally and it starts at home, whatever home is for you. And that's something I'm really committed to, and still the double standard for women in our industry. And that's something that I'm working on by empowering women to be able to have the confidence and clarity that they need in order to lead from a whole, aligned, authentic place.
Awesome. I want to just ask a question here. And I know that there are differences between men and women, of course, but could you maybe talk about why, like what's different about coaching women through this than coaching men through this?
Yeah. And I do get that question a lot. And I work with a lot of men too. So I have a lot of that perspective. And of course, there's overlap. You know, we all deal with similar issues and problems when it comes to, even from the personal development space. I think for women, it's a lot of nuance. One of my favorite analogies is saying you're an iPhone user living in an Android world, for example, where it's anyone or vice versa, anyone that's used an Android versus an iPhone, you know your phone really well, and then you go and use somebody else's phone. Like my husband's an Android user, I'm an iPhone user. I pick up his phone. They're both smartphones. They both do the exact same stuff. I pick up his phone. I'm like, what is this thing? Like, I can't figure it out, right? And they both do the same exact thing, but it's just that intuitive nature of how things look and flow. So it is challenging for, I think, men to really understand the nuance. But then when you get with certain women that are tuned in and aware, they're like, oh yes, like I do experience that for sure. And so it's a matter of perception, and then also what's going on internally with our wiring and how we see and experience the world. So women tend to be highly intuitive and we feel more. And so oftentimes there's the messaging that we get from more of a mindset perspective or a logic perspective, like, yes, this should make sense. And then there's the feeling part of it where maybe it doesn't align. And then we struggle because we live in a system that doesn't really, cater to feelings, right? And it's also built with a certain viewpoint and mindset. And so when we're not paying attention to our feelings, it can get really confusing. We start to lose trust in ourselves. We're called emotional, or not practical. There's a lot of terminology that's thrown around that causes us to no longer trust ourselves and separate from that. And it can be really challenging. And, there's a lot of statistics out there that even though, yes, the percentage of women graduating from dental school has increased, which is awesome. And now it's more than half. However, the amount of women that are in ownership is far less. And also the amount of women that work full time in dentistry as active dentists is way less. And then also the amount of women that are specialists is profoundly less. And one of the reasons for that is women do crave balance. They can get easily exhausted by the pressures of not only working full-time as a dental owner or a full-time dentist, but also being the mom, also being the partner, all the emotional energy that goes into just, being a woman, because we are nurturers. We do have empathy and compassion. That's sort of our intuitive role, is to have that nurturing sense and want to take care of things and take care of people more commonly, than men. So when you're there's no payout for emotional support. That's not dictated in someone's pay, right? So that's why
Because it can actually be draining,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
It can be depleting.
By a long shot. And there's no compensation for it, so to speak. So that's why they call it silent labor, because no one talks about the toll it takes, and there's no financial exchange for that. Over time, it can really wear a woman down where they're not able, it's just exhausting. It's too much to be all the things to all people. So that's a lot of the nuance, and also in how we communicate. I share even some of this from my own personal life, that if I was to share something that, with firm tone of voice and with, boundaries and a lot of clarity, it can be considered being a jerk or, a bitch, or I don't know what I can say on your podcast, but, those types of things where if a man communicates in that kind of tone or language, it's considered, powerful and, oh, they mean business and I better take it
Masculine,
seriously and
right?
masculine. And
Yeah.
I have respect for that. So it's just, there's a lot that we have to do, and there's a lot of juggling that goes on so that we can be perceived as kind and nice and palatable and not too much, but also enough. So it's a lot of that goes into it.
Interesting. So, as you're talking, what immediately comes to mind, and perhaps this is because I'm a man, is I'm thinking, okay, so how do we solve all this? And I don't mean to jump in and try to do that.
Fix the problem.
Yeah, it's an ongoing joke between my wife and I.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in how you're trying to specifically, what you are trying to do to address this. What does that look like? And how do you also sort of get somebody to acknowledge? Because sometimes we're so wrapped up in ourselves and in our current environment and everything else. I would imagine there's a fair amount of unpacking that can sometimes need to be accomplished in the process. So I'd love to hear kind of how do you address somebody? Maybe think of that ideal, person that's in this place and walk us through how does that work? Because I think empowering women in dentistry it's one of the most important things. And we know that women take up more of the jobs, generally speaking, than men. And so I'm interested in sort of hearing how it works.
Yeah. And thank you for asking that, because I do think it's important to even point that out. A lot of women struggle in even investing in themselves because it's, the self-worth idea of, well, my money's better spent on other things. So a lot of women will think, oh, well, I'd rather, spend my money on getting my kid, something they want, or putting it towards a family vacation, or whatever the home needs or the family needs, or something like that. Like it's hard to say, like, I deserve to have this experience. And I did try to price it at a point that was as affordable as possible for people. And even with that, it's really hard for women to want to invest in themselves. and invest in themselves personally. So I think that's a hurdle that I really encourage women to talk to somebody about or get over, or, happy to talk one-on-one with anyone who's interested that's struggling with overcoming that. I also find what I think is interesting is men in offices are more willing to invest in the women on their teams because they see the opportunity for it than women actually saying, hey, I would like this for myself. So that's really interesting because women do struggle with investing in themselves and using money to work on themselves internally. So there's that. There's also
I want to challenge you
yeah,
right now for a second, right?
yeah,
Let's stop for a second and say,
yeah.
okay, let's say that I have a woman that's working on my team and I'm sensing that there's some burnout and some challenge or whatever. And maybe I don't know much about what's happening at home or anything else, but there's something going on. How would you coach me to approach that individual? No, I'm being dead serious
Yeah,
because
I'm happy to answer. Yeah.
sometimes I think if we're thinking about men and women, I think sometimes men are a little nervous to sort of step into that because they want to be. I believe they want to be sensitive and they don't want to be, come across as rude or mean or as, assuming anything too far. So I'd love to, if we want to role play it, I'd be happy to do that. But I think
Yeah.
I think it'd be really interesting for the listeners to understand that because this conflict happens a lot.
Yeah. And I think it's, for men, like you even said, you're a fixer, right? So if you're coming with the approach of like, hey, you're broken and I want to fix you. Yes, you're not going to get the response that you would want typically. And we're totally stereotyping right now, but let's just play along that
Yep.
you're not going to typically get the response you'd expect because then you are saying like, hey, something's wrong with you and I have the solution, and we're going to be like, no, you don't. You don't know me kind of thing. But if you're coming across like, hey, I invest in myself. I do a lot of inner work. I invest in myself personally, like Ken, because I know you personally, I do know that you invest in yourself a lot for personal development. And that's something that you believe in, right? So you always want to share from your own experience. Right. And that way it's the idea of inspiring other people into enrolling them into, something that has worked for you. And sometimes it takes time for someone to really get it, right? Especially if it's new for them. But you're saying, hey, you know what? I really believe in personal development. I work on myself a lot. And that's something I share all the time as well. I think it's really important as a coach to constantly be working on yourself and be in, like, I have lots of coaches, I have community, I have so many things, as you know, that I always say keeps a village to keep me straight. And I believe in it. And I'm always on the court. And if you have a coach or anything like that that's not actively on the court, then you got to find yourself another coach because it's never over. Right. And I'm not saying that I'm on this perpetual quest to be good enough. You need accountability. You need ways and the world's changing, we're changing, our problems are always evolving. So it's great to get different perspectives. So it's always in how you present it. And if you present it in a way that like, hey, this is something that I actually invest in as well. And this is something that I believe in. And then you would just say, hey, there's this woman, her name is Brandi. She has this really cool program. I know her personally. I think she's great. I think you might resonate with some of the stuff she says because I know I do. Right. And I really like what she has to share. And here's a program. If you're interested in exploring this, let me know. So it's more of an invitation and a suggestion than it is like, hey, I've noticed, you got a lot of stuff going on in your life. You've been kind of a drag the last couple months. And I think you could really use some therapy or coaching to help fix you. You're not going to get a really positive response. Right. But
Yeah,
again,
that's what I was getting at the beginning is like,
yeah.
there's going to be a right way and a wrong way to approach somebody on your team to help them feel encouraged and like you're supporting, not you're demeaning or
yeah, and then you can present it to
undermining.
all the women on your team, right? So certain women don't feel pinpointed or called out or something like that. Like, hey, why are they only showing me about this program and not everybody else? Do they think I need this more than Susie or something like that, right? So it's nice to be able to share it with everybody and again, come from your own experience. And then the ones that will resonate, and the ones that won't. Because also this curriculum that I designed is really designed for people who are open and willing. And that's true for anything, right? Any kind of coaching or personal development work, you need to have some crack in the door of willingness in order for any of it to land. And I do believe when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and that's for everything. I've been working with certain people for years, like at them as my own mentors or coaches. And, I have a spiritual advisor, and she has said the same thing to me in certain areas for 10 years. And then just this last year, I was like, oh my God, I finally got it. So it takes time for sure.
Interesting. So you talked about this curriculum, and I think that it would be helpful just to think about, because this is a truth in dentistry that you're dedicating your career really to trying to elevate this and have a massive impact, which I think there's so much opportunity for. What I think would be really interesting is if you could give us a couple of highlights about the curriculum, because I think that could potentially tell us how you're thinking about how you're going to try to solve this, really important issue that isn't talked about much in dentistry. It's swept under the carpet in some instances, right? So
Yeah.
would you be willing to just peel the onion back here a little bit and show us a little bit of that, or just talk about the curriculum side? Because I think that would help people's minds really start to get around how does something like this work and how can change really occur?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and I often say this too, like the way that I design this curriculum, it honestly is a compliment to anything anyone else is doing. So when it comes to other coaches, consultants, advisors, mentors, this is something that is easily an add-on to whatever anyone else is doing. It's not competing with any sort of traditional coaching or consulting program, because what I'm really focusing on is fundamentals. And one of my big beliefs is you always have to get back to the fundamentals. And especially as you become more and more successful and get more and more elevated in your career, you lose sight of the fundamentals and you lose sight of what got you there in the first place.
Yeah.
And so this is like coming home in a lot of ways that you're going to always want to be reminded of. So that's why I say this is the foundation. So I'm helping you lay the foundation. We're putting down the concrete or whatever foundations are made out of. And then, everyone else can help you build the house, the designs, the interior, whatever artwork you want to have on the walls, like your neighbors, like all that kind of stuff. But this is true foundational stuff. And this is stuff that I've used in my life personally, so I know it works. And for example, and this is all laid out on the website too, as far as what the curriculum is. So if anyone has any questions, it's all on there. But one of the first things we start out with is our beliefs. Again, seems super obvious, but how often do people actually talk about their beliefs? And I'm not talking about faith or religion or anything like that, although that does play into it. But it's more about, what do you stand for? Like, what are you connected to at a soul level? Because most people don't question things. They don't even have it defined. So one of the things a lot of women struggle with is being able to communicate effectively, hold boundaries, and feel really grounded and rooted and operate from a place of clarity and confidence. And one of the biggest reasons why people struggle with clarity and confidence is they don't know what they stand for. If you don't know what you stand for and you don't know what your beliefs are and your values are, it's really hard to be able to feel rooted when you're having difficult conversations or making business decisions, right? If you're out here comparing yourself to everybody else or doing what your fellow colleagues are doing because it looks good, or everyone's saying you got to do this or that, you're going to lose yourself in the sauce, right? So you got to get really rooted. And I joke, I'm from New York. So of course I was raised on the Giants, the Knicks, and the Yankees. And as an adult, I root for the Giants, the Knicks, and the Yankees. Although now being in Michigan, I do go Lions and Tigers. But I was raised on New York teams. It's in my blood, right? So as I got older, I never questioned who I'm going to root for in sports. And that's how it is in any kind of belief. You grow up a certain political party. Most kids of a certain political party, they grow up, they vote the same way that their families have done because they've always done that thing. And it takes conscious effort to explore and research and say, do I still want to be associated with this political party, for example, right? A lot of us don't question things. We just inherit beliefs, or society tells us you have to be this way, right? And I know you deal with this even, in the accounting finance world. There's a lot of beliefs on how things are managed and how they should be presented. And that's what's so cool about you is you're like, hell no, this is how we're going to do it because this is what I stand for and this is what I believe. And you're somebody that goes against the grain. Right. But it took courage to be able to do that. And it also took having a lot of clarity and saying, this is what I stand for and this is what I believe. And so
it also attracts haters to some degree, right?
Yeah.
And
For sure.
and ultimately we have to adopt the mindset, if we're going to zig when other people are zagging, we have to be willing to let them go.
Yeah.
And because otherwise it just creates way too much noise in life.
Mhm.
And so I'm just sharing this from the perspective of, if I'm trying to build my foundation on my core beliefs, you can generally overcome just about any struggle or any challenge. But it does not mean that it will be easy. In fact, it means that there may be a whole lot of people lined up to kick you in the teeth because they vehemently disagree with that belief that you have, right? And so it's an interesting, it's just such an interesting concept to think about.
Yeah, and you're very public because this is your work, right? So you'll be exposed to that. For certain women, like, just being clear in what your beliefs are, you can have that like, for me, for example, I have a very internal, clarity on, like, what I stand for, but not everybody knows about it. I'm not always preaching from the rooftops or the mountaintops, like, what I believe in. And I use discretion in certain audiences and how I communicate and things like that. But for me, it helps me dictate how I spend my time, who I spend my time with, the stuff I like to talk about, right? And where I have clear boundaries. And so I'm very confident in that, right? And so then we go in another layer, which are values, which you think, oh, they might be the same as beliefs, but they're not, right? Values are like the expression of it. And I always say values are like the bumpers that you put in the gutter at the bowling alley, right? They keep you contained, they keep you in. And so even as I'm navigating business relationships or anything like that, I'm always being mindful of the values, right? And if things don't align with my values, then I'm like, okay, this isn't a fit anymore. And a lot of women stay too long in jobs or positions or even relationships, friendships, right? Because they don't know their values, and they stay too long because they don't have the clarity. They're thinking too cerebrally about, like, well, the benefits are great, or the pay is great, or I get this or I get that, or I really like the title. They're saying all these things to themselves. Meanwhile, they're sacrificing their own health and wellness to violate their values. And the physical, mental, and emotional and spiritual consequences of violating your values for a prolonged period of time is severe. And most women don't recognize that until later in life, and they still don't get it. They start having physical symptoms, right? The weight
Yeah.
gain, the exhaustion, sleepless nights, hair falling out, skin issues, digestive issues, all these different issues. And they're thinking, oh, something's wrong with me. And the reality is they're working in a toxic workplace, or they're working with somebody where the values don't align. So those are things. So I'm shining the light on some of these really fundamental things that people tend to overlook. And then we get into goals and how does that line up? We get into sustainability in your lifestyle so that you can have guardrails, so that you are protecting your peace as you move through this. We do talk about communication and setting boundaries, and also determining what kind of communication style you have and how to communicate effectively, where you're rooted in your boundaries and your values and beliefs. And the way the curriculum is set up is that it all builds on top of each other. So by the end of the 6 months, you're feeling in a very grounded, clear space, and you leave with a blueprint of what you want to do next in your life, your business. And some of your goals can be huge. Some of them, they don't have to be. Or it can give you a lot of assurance that you are on the path, that you are living in a place of alignment. And then you can let all that BS go of, am I doing enough? Shouldn't I, comparing myself to everybody else? You can let that go and be in a place of peace and really committed to people living peaceful lives. I think that's super critical.
Yeah, that's powerful. I was thinking about this sort of in a more physical way, not a conceptual way. And I was just thinking about how when we're decluttering our house, we're supposed to look at that item and say, does this bring me joy?
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
chuck
That's
it.
great.
And so in some ways, somebody that's working with you or just wants to even, maybe try to self-work themselves through this, they might be able to sit back and say, okay, this belief that I have, does this bring me joy or does this not? Or does
Yeah.
this fulfill something that I need or not? So
Yeah.
it's just maybe a slightly different frame to think about it. That's just what came to mind as you were
Yeah,
talking.
I love that. That's a great, like, everyday example that I know people can relate to. And I think too, it's also important to give ourselves permission on, like, when our values change, because what I valued in my 20s is not what I value today. I used to pride myself. I was sort of this crunchy, hippie, outdoorsy type through most of my 20s, and I was as frugal could be, and I would pride myself on how, cheaply I could get things or how inexpensive I could, take a flight. And sometimes I'd have like 2 to 3 connections or something like that to like save $100, on a flight. And I could do that in my 20s. And today I value, convenience and ease and, my sleep. Right. And so I didn't value my sleep in my 20s, but I do now. And so that's why it's super important to me to be able to make those changes, or I'll make choices that value those things in my life, for example. So I think that's important to consider too, is some of us might be operating on an old value system and judging ourselves.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's so great. All right. So we've got just a few minutes left.
Yeah.
How would you wrap this up and make sure that you share your contact information, so anyone who might want to reach out, who might have interest or might want to, just ask some questions, we want to make sure they have the opportunity to connect with you.
Yeah, I mean, I am so open to having conversations with anyone who wants to talk to me about this or see if they're fit. Find me on LinkedIn. Just shoot me a note, or Instagram. So I'm Brandi, Brandi, Marzolino, Marzolino. And that's where you can find me on LinkedIn, and then also on Instagram. So shoot me a note and we can connect and schedule a time if you want to chit chat to see if this works for you. And then the website is leadhershipexperience.com. And you can find a ton of information on there too, if you or somebody you know or your team is interested in this, because I'm out to change the industry one woman at a time. So let's do it. And I really appreciate your support with this, Ken, too.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you. It's been awesome to have you as a guest. And I'd encourage anybody that's listening in that if this piqued your interest at all, feel free to reach out to Brandi. We've known each other now for quite a while, have a very trusted relationship. And I dare say that I don't think she'd do anybody wrong. You're so passionate about what you're trying to do, and it's fun to watch and fun to see. And I'm excited to watch the difference that you can make.
Thanks so much, Ken. That means a lot. And, I think you're a genius, and everyone should listen to Ken and use him in his services. You are a genius. You are a genius. Everyone should do that.
You're kind. Thank you. All right. Well, that is today's episode for the Dental Truth Project. Brandi Marzolino, absolute pleasure to have you here, and look forward to continuing to be connected with you in dentistry. Thanks again for sharing all your thoughts and your insights. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. We generally are dropping episodes every Wednesday morning. I'm Ken Kaufman, and until next time, keep seeking the truth that helps dentistry thrive. Happy day.